If you have clicked on this video, then you will likely have seen that the president of the Canadian Neonatal Foundation, Dr. Shoo Lee, along with a panel of quoted experts, did what former Director of Public Prosecutions Ken MacDonald described as trash the prosecution case. One individual who was particularly criticised by Dr. Lee was former celebrity TV doctor Ravi Jayaram, who was a key, albeit somewhat unreliable witness for the prosecution over 2 trials.
The consultant did not understand the basics of resuscitation, of air leak, of mechanical ventilation, and how the equipment that
etc. Dr. Jayaram was not the only individual criticised by Dr. Lee, with Dr. Evans once again coming under fire.
If our panel found so many problems with the medical care provided by this team at this hospital, how is it that Dr. Evans found none?
The line of criticism from Dr. Lee echoed the defence strategy from Lucy Letby's team at the first trial. Looking at paragraph 32 from the Court of Appeal decision, quote, Mr. Myers, on behalf of the applicant, challenged the good faith of some of the medical witnesses on the grounds that the applicant was being scapegoated for substandard care, close quote. Notably, Dr. Lee suggested that Dr. Evans may have been playing a part in a cover-up.
So was he just callous, or was it deliberate?
In this video, I'm going to go through some of the issues Dr. Lee has taken with the air embolism evidence at the trial and some of the strange coincidences that surround Drs. Jayaram and Evans that I think should make a reasonably open-minded individual sceptical that they did act in good faith. There are several issues with the presentation of the air embolism theory which Dr. Lee has taken issue with. The first I'm going to mention is the appearance of a mysterious pink flitting rash as described by Dr. Ravi Jayaram. The second is the issue of a venous air embolism versus an arterial air embolism. Other issues may be air embolisms caused by high pressure ventilation and/or 100% oxygen versus room air. Aside from Dr. Shoo Lee and the expert panel, Lucy Letby's uncalled defence witness, Dr. Mike Hall, who saw the whole of the trial, also wrote a letter to the British Medical Journal after the trial, raising major doubts about the air embolism theory. Something that is noteworthy is that although a 1989 paper by Dr. Lee was quoted at the trial, he has since published another paper in December 2024, Vascular Air Embolism in Neonates, a literature review. Although some people are saying it would take an unprecedented legal intervention or long-lost eyewitness to reopen the Lucy Letby case, this is not necessarily true. If you look at the highlighted passage from the Angela Canning's Court of Appeal decision to overturn her conviction, quote, "We have now given our reasons for concluding that these convictions are unsafe. We have received significant and persuasive fresh evidence which was not before the jury, some of it the result of further research or research published post-trial," close quote. So there is a precedent for new research to count as new evidence. Furthermore, there are other clear and obvious issues with the trial, such as the police getting the swipe data back to front, and Dr. Evans contradicting his evidence at trial in interviews after the trial to the media. So first on the issue of Lee's sign, or Ravi Jayaram's pink flitting rash. According to Dr. Shoo Lee's papers, there is a specific pattern of skin discoloration which has only ever been reported in the medical literature in cases of vascular air embolism. This means that if Ravi Jayaram can say that he saw this pattern of skin discoloration, it makes it highly likely that a vascular air embolism has taken place. As air embolism is often fatal, this can then in turn be used to fuel allegations of either attempted murder, gross negligence, or murder. So let's look at the relevant excerpt for this. I think it's described similarly in both the 1989 paper and the December 2024 paper, but I'm going to focus on the 2024 paper as it's open access. Quote, there are a few pathognomic cutaneous signs of vascular air embolism in infants. Closing in on this part, there are a few pathognomic signs. Looking at a definition of pathognomic, a sign or symptom specifically characteristic or indicative of a particular disease or condition. So by the time of the Lucy Letby trial, with Lucy Letby in the dock, if Ravi Jayaram can say he saw Lee's sign, or what will become an increasingly vague description of it, he can in effect diagnose murder, as Lee's sign does not crop up anywhere else in the medical literature, and there's only one explanation for it, that there's been an air embolism. You can see a bit more about Lee's sign here. Lee's sign, bracket, pink red blood vessels superimposed on the cyanose background, close bracket, is a specific skin discoloration that has only been reported in infants with vascular air embolism and is attributed to direct oxygenation of erythrocytes or red blood cells adjacent to free air in the vasculature. You can see an example of a baby's cyanose skin on screen next to an adult hand. So I don't have an exact image for Lee's sign, but if you can imagine skin that looks like the baby's with pink red blood vessels standing out. So now to look at some of what Dr. Ravi Jayaram said in court. Looking at this independent article from Monday 24th of October 2022. Consultant tells trial skin marks, quote, didn't fit with anything he'd seen before, close quote. This makes sense if he's going to say that he saw Lee's sign. As we have seen, Lee's sign only occurs in cases where there's been a vascular air embolism. Looking a bit more at Dr. Jayaram's testimony quoted in the body of the article, quote, what I did not give any clinical significance to at the time was unusual patches of discoloration. I didn't actually record it in the notes. Pink patches mainly on the torso, which seem to appear and disappear and flit around, close quote. When Lucy Letby defense barrister Ben Myers puts it to Dr. Jayaram that as he didn't record it in his notes, he might have been making it up, Dr. Jayaram would say, quote, as a paediatrician of 30 years and a doctor of 32 years, if my character was such that I would make things up, I would hope friends, colleagues, doctors, nurses, parents, families would have picked up on this before now, close quote. The problem here is that it would come out at the Thirlwall inquiry that there were colleagues who had known Dr. Jayaram for a long time who found him untrustworthy. For instance, Dr. Green would conduct a grievance investigation for Lucy Letby into allegations she'd been bullied and harassed by Dr. Jayaram.
I'd known Ravi for 10, 12 years by this point.
The meeting notes from the conclusion of the grievance process show that Dr. Green would say after his investigation, quote, I was disgusted by their behaviour. It is likely they lied, close quote, in relation to Drs. Breary and Jayaram. I will leave a link to these meeting minutes in the description. The Dr. Green quote comes on page 7. Another issue with Dr. Jayaram's testimony is that other witnesses don't quite seem to see what he sees. Looking to the testimony from Dr. Harkness in relation to the case of baby A. As you heard before, Dr. Ravi Jayaram said he saw a pink flitting rash on this baby. You can find quotes from the testimony of Dr. Harkness in the Chester Standard Court Report on Thursday 20th of October, and there's a link to this in the description. Just below the 2:35 timestamp, Dr. Harkness agrees the skin patches of purple, blue, red and white were very striking, but as he was not forensically analysing the skin at the time, so there's no mention here of Lee's sign or Ravi Jayaram's pink flitting rash. When the mother of child A is asked about the rash at the Thirlwall inquiry, she says they didn't bother, as in they didn't bother paying any attention to the rash. She goes on to say, which to me is only half a job, because they should have took a photo of it, especially knowing what we now know. That could have been anything. That rash could have been absolutely anything. It could have been a deadly virus. It was going to spread through the whole hospital, and it was just a case of, oh, now it's gone. She would also say of her interactions with Dr. Jayaram when she was trying to raise concerns. Dr. Jayaram's reply to me and everything, it just felt really half-hearted, and that's why I wanted to say, we are human beings and we lost our child. At no point did I think anybody was trying. I think it was just a case of, he was a patient, he died. That's the end of it. Move on. There's a strange coincidence with the air embolism evidence, in that despite Dr. Shoo Lee's initial 1989 paper being superficially quite an obscure paper, albeit one that offers a potentially cast iron diagnosis for murder in certain contexts due to the uniqueness of Lee's sign, Dr. Jayaram and Dr. Evans will both claim in court to independently discover the paper and also be the first one to discover it. Going by Dr. Jayaram's accounts alone, there seems to be multiple different references to when he first discovered the paper. I don't have the official trial transcript for the parts of the trial where child M is discussed, although the transcript is going round. I'm going to look at some play-by-play tweets where child M is discussed, where they also get into Ravi Jayaram discussing the occasion he discovered Dr. Lee's 1989 paper and the phenomenon of Lee's sign. Jayaram speaking underlined it, as in the situation on the unit, prompted me to do a literature search. I remember sitting on my sofa at home with my iPad. I remember the physical chill that went down my spine when I read that, because it fitted with what we were seeing. You can see a reference later in the Twitter thread to pink blotches. So now to look at an exchange that took place in court on 7th of March 2023. Lucy Letby defense barrister Ben Myers will question Dr. Evans, and he will take credit for the air embolism theory. In court 3 weeks after, Ravi Jayaram said he felt the physical chill go down his spine after reading about the paper on air embolisms. Mr. Myers went on, at some point before you started writing reports, you were told by the police about suspicious rashes and air embolists, weren't you? Dr. Evans said, that is completely untrue. It's totally untrue. The first time I heard a local doctor mention air embolus was a couple of weeks ago. The first person I know to raise the area of air embolus was me. I did that in case number 1, and I thought, oh my God, what is going on here? However, as we shall see when we come on to the criticisms from Dr. Shoo Lee and Dr. Mike Hall, these two doctors, Jayaram and Evans, both seem to have independently arrived on the same wrong answer. So it's almost like an exam in school where two students both answer incorrectly the capital of New Zealand is Melbourne. It does raise a red flag that perhaps one of them copied from the other, or perhaps they worked together. One issue that Dr. Lee took with the use of his research is that his prior research described arterial air embolism, whereas Lucy Letby was accused of injecting air into a vein. Dr. Lee's literature review found that local or very regional skin discolorations had never been observed with the venous air embolism.
In no cases of venous air embolism was there ever been described patchy skin discolorations.
An issue which Dr. Mike Hall took, which he mentions in his letters to the British Medical Journal, and it's a problem he takes with the use of the 1989 paper, is that, quote, the babies were all receiving mechanical ventilation, which was pumping high concentrations of oxygen into babies' lungs, close quote. So remember, Lucy Letby is accused of injecting air into a vein at low pressure. There's quite an extensive list of issues Dr. Lee takes with the use of his research. I'm not going to go over all of them here. Part of the diagnosis for air embolism by Dr. Evans was that the babies did not respond to resuscitation. If you look at this quote from Dr. Lee's latest paper, although he acknowledges that prognosis is usually bleak, he says, quote, "The infant should be given 100% oxygen to correct hypoxemia and increase the diffusion gradient for nitrogen out of the bubbles, causing them to shrink," close quote. So this suggests that the babies could be responsive to resuscitation, where 100% oxygen would be administered. The next part of Dr. Lee's press conference, which puts pressure on Dr. Jayaram, is the part where he describes the care for baby K, or baby 11. Lucy Letby was convicted for attempted murder for this baby. However, according to Dr. Lee, he has strong suspicions the tube was not even dislodged.
First, there is no evidence to support a dislodged endotracheal tube. The clinical deterioration was caused by the use of an undersized endotracheal tube.
Those who have a cynical view of Dr. Jayaram will no doubt say this evidence gives more weight to the idea that his story about the baby K incident was in fact a fabrication. For those who are new to the Lucy Letby case, you may have heard the police got the swipe data the wrong way round and only discovered this between the first trial and the second retrial for baby K. The problem for Dr. Jayaram is that his first and second trial testimony contradict each other, whereas if you go through it, the nurses involved in the baby K case give consistent accounts. So putting these two different versions of nurse Joanne Williams' keycard activity together in one image, which you are free to pause if you want to process this issue, which is key to the trial. The top image is from the Chester Standard play-by-play, February 28, 2023. It says nurse Joanne Williams left the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. The bottom screenshot is from the Chester Standard play-by-play, June 20th, 2024, which says she actually went in to the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. At a distance, this could seem pedantic. However, you have to remember Dr. Jayaram has made a lot of melodramatic statements about this moment, including the fact he looked at his watch.
Okay. That is a night that is etched on my memory and will be in my nightmares forever, to be honest.
So now looking at Dr. Jayaram's testimony, which is from February 28th, 2023, and a link to the Chester Standard report is in the description. 2:48 p.m. The court is shown swipe data for Joanne Williams, who left the neonatal unit at 3:47 a.m. Remember, these timings are reversed in the second trial. Mr. Myers says it is very precise in coinciding with Dr. Jayaram's recollection of waiting 2 to 3 minutes before the desaturation is timed at 3:50 a.m. and asks if Dr. Jayaram always had such a precise memory. Dr. Jayaram says, "In this event I did." He adds, "I kept telling myself, don't be ridiculous. I looked at my watch. I didn't have a stopwatch." So once again, it's very bizarre that he has this precise memory of looking at the watch, even though we now know the police got the swipe data wrong at this time point. The testimony continues, quote, Dr. Jayaram says it would be appreciated if Mr. Myers gave an indication of where he was going with his questioning. This particular quote I think is quite interesting. Here you have Dr. Jayaram bristling at the mere suggestion that his testimony may be incorrect. However, by trial 2, it's hard to identify a time period where Letby would have been alone and had a window of opportunity to commit the attack. Furthermore, his recollection of events seems to be at odds with two nurses. Mr. Myers says an earlier police interview had Dr. Jayaram not giving a precise estimate of how long Joanne Williams had been out, but is able to now give a more precise estimate several years later. Dr. Jayaram is quoted as saying, "The point is this incident happened in the window when she, as in Joanne Williams, was out." He tells the court this incident is, quote, emblazoned in his mind. You have to wonder if this incident is emblazoned accurately. In the first trial, there was a window after Joanne Williams swipes out at 3:47 for Letby to be alone and attack. By trial 2, we now know that she actually swiped back in at 3:47. The issue is further complicated by the fact that nurse Caroline Oakley, who was assigned to nursery room 1, but says she can't remember the events, swipes back in at 3:40, with the prosecution timing the attack at 3:45, contradicting Dr. Jayaram's earlier testimony of remembering looking at his watch at 3:50. The following is from the Chester Standard 19th June 2024, timestamped so you can quickly scroll to it for corroboration. 3:34 p.m. Mr. Myers asks about the alarm system. Dr. Jayaram says he is, quote, absolutely certain it was not sounding. He is asked to look at a 2018 police interview at Blackham Police Station, and at the time he said he couldn't remember. Dr. Jayaram says, quote, I don't know why I said that, end quote. 3:36 p.m. It continues. Mr. Myers says Dr. Jayaram said for a second and third time later that interview he couldn't remember if the alarm had gone off or not. Dr. Jayaram says, quote, with absolute certainty it was not an alarm sounding that prompted him to go into the room. The following excerpt is from the Chester Standard play-by-play, Thursday, June 20th, 2024, and it refers to nurse Joanne Williams. Miss Williams is asked about her return to the nursery room 1. It is in nursery room 1 where Dr. Jayaram is claiming he catches Lucy Letby dislodging a tube, silencing the alarms, in an attempt to slowly watch her die.
Ordinarily, number one, the alarms would have been going off.
Nurse Joanne Williams frames Dr. Jayaram as not really knowing what's going on, and from the sounds of things, looking for someone to blame as much as catching Letby in the act. The Chester Standard quote her saying that Dr. Jayaram said, quote, what's happened and who was in the room at the time, end quote. Remember, if he had just caught Letby in the act, emblazoned in his mind, etc., it's unlikely he would be asking who was in the room at the time. The following is a quote from prosecutor Nick Johnson's closing speech. If you want to verify it, it can be found in the description as the live feed from the Chester Standard for the 1st of July, and it is timestamped at 12:34. Quote, she, as in Joanne Williams, had said Dr. Jayaram had asked her who was in the room at the time the alarm went off, at the time of the first desaturation. You may wonder why the Chester Standard didn't get the full quote the first time, or did they make an error later? I think it comes down to the issue of talking faster than you can type. If you go by Dr. Lee's description, the desaturations were caused by an air leak.
A 94% air leak was detected and ventilation was continued.
Dr. Lee would describe how this air leak would mimic the effects of a tube dislodgement, however, is ultimately a different explanation.
That's kind of like using a straw and blowing through a garden hose and hoping that you can inflate something at the end of the garden hose, right? It doesn't work.
So in conclusion, the criticism from Dr. Lee now raises doubts about the competence of Dr. Ravi Jayaram. There are also a number of strange coincidences that raise red flags about the evidence he gave at the Lucy Letby trials. It may be the case that Dr. Evans copied Dr. Jayaram for the air embolism theory, but it's undoubtedly strange that two doctors seem to have arrived at a very obscure answer and got the answer wrong.